But looking towards the future then, 2020 has clearly been a very unpredictable year. My summary for this conversation actually was going to be, are we trying to predict the unpredictable in looking at the future? And I think, as I touched on when I introed, there are some things we know are on the cards, but the one thing for me that's still uncertain is the degree to which workplaces will reopen, people will go back to commuting, as Chris said, will people kind of go back to kind of, if they're consultants, going and seeing clients all the time again, or will we get to some kind of hybrid model where people use physical spaces for collaboration and for kind of kicking things off and coming together, and then we kind of have some kind of hybrid split of working remotely and working in the office. But for me, that's going to be challenging, isn't it? Because you can think about, this works at the moment because everyone is on a level playing field. Everyone is on their laptop and webcam. We're not in a situation where large groups of people are in the office, but when we get to that situation where perhaps there are still people shielding, or there are people that haven't been vaccinated, or who knows what the permutations will be in 2021, right? It's too hard to kind of predict that element of it. There is almost certainly going to be this kind of mixed model, isn't there, for some time? And so that's perhaps where there's opportunities for innovation, be that just a better work-life balance thing, a better, more immersive experience in meetings. My one observation is how fatiguing it is to be on Zoom all day, because it's so much harder, isn't it, I think, to tune into the non-verbal cues. Are they disagreeing? Has Zoom just frozen? A successful Zoom and Teams and Google Meet and all those sort of things have been this year. It feels to me like there is still potential for innovation there, whether that's augmented reality or virtual reality, all these sort of things that have been on the cusp. You look at gaming and you look at how immersive computer games are, and you think, if we could only take some of that sort of approach to work, what would the potential be? Could you have a far more immersive virtual workshop, for example, than trying to just share a screen and talk over it? What do you folks think about that? Are there tech trends that you kind of see continuing or changing into next year?
A bit on video conferencing, right? This tech has been around, but did it ever really work that well? I mean, honestly, right? And facilities did their best with like little laminated cards on like how to use the system, and no one could ever figure it out.
But people always used to mess with the cables, right? And
right, yeah. And how many dongles did you need, right? If you were doing a manual plug, like all this sort of stuff, it just never really worked that well. Yeah. And how quickly we realized like, oh, there's a better way. There are many different better ways. It dawned on me in sort of the March timeframe how terrible WebEx really is, right? How terrible Skype was, right? It's like, oh my gosh, these things were horrible, and yet we used them for like better part of a decade, or didn't, or tried, or something. Mm-hmm. And tools like a Zoom, other things, right? They come along, and it's like, oh no, it can be better, right? From a tech perspective.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, in the prediction business, right? I wonder if we talked about like, oh, VPN is dead, and we've got RSA tokens and all these different things, right, to connect to the business network. I wonder if that's going to go through a major change, a simplification change, a user experience change, the way conferencing did. Because honestly, unless you're in IT or security, you don't really understand how the VPN works and like all this kind of stuff. And like, I mean, honestly, right? It's like half the time people don't know they're on mute, and you're expecting them to figure out RSA tokens and like certificates and like, I mean, so
it's all too complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so here's my prediction, right? Citrix is dead because, oh my God, how horrible is that experience? Now we've realized, right? It's just terrible. And so I think someone's got to simplify and create a better user experience around a couple of these connectivity things that we've done badly now for a couple decades.
Yeah. But I mean, Tom, I was going to come to you next in terms of, do you think 2020 has been the year where businesses have realized that some of the benefits of cloud, and that you can no longer really be on-premise centric? The castle walls have probably had to come down this year, right? And people have realized that there's some far better ways of working, but perhaps they're now getting quite frustrated with some of the on-prem kind of constraints like VPN and things like that. What's your take on that?
Definitely. I mean, just one of the organizations that I know through family connections that have really struggled with this actually law firms, because they are so focused on being on premise, and you haven't done it until you've signed a piece of paper and all that kind of stuff. And they've had to innovate really quickly. And I think coming back to something Chris said, I think the whole employee experience part of that, of which connectivity is a piece, is going to be really important. And actually, I think it's not going to be technology driven. It's going to be probably driven by more psychological aspects. For instance, the improvements that we're going to make in virtual meetings, I think, are going to be entirely driven by behavioral driven design, rather than not behavior driven design, but behavioral design drivers, in order to get us to use what we've got more efficiently. Because let's face it, what's been the most efficient way to use video conferencing has been our own laptop sitting at a desk at home, not your $100,000 Cisco presence suite, right? That's the real revelation from this, right? Is actually me sitting at home with a laptop is the best way of doing this. And I think, you know, to your point, Oliver, about how cloud's going to impact this is, well, we don't want to have to go to an office to install, whether it's software or hardware or whatever. We don't have a meeting place, and so we're going to move to a more virtual model. And of course, what cloud does give us is not necessarily an economic benefit in terms of cost of computing, but it's an economic benefit in terms of being able to move faster. So it's about being able to bring in these extra disciplines, you know, like psychology, for instance, into our normal business processes in a quicker way than before. And I think that's probably where we're going to see a big change in things. And that's going to tie into things like AI. Like, how do we, if we use AI, RPA or something to automate a business process that we as employees have to deal with, how are we going to make that more friendly? How are we going to make it seem like we're winning? Because one of the problems you can see with AI is that the AI always flipping wins because it knows the numbers and we've only got judgments to go on, right? So how do we make that more engaging and more satisfying for our employees to deal with? Because at the end of the day, the numbers have got to win. So how do we enable our employees to be able to do that?
Sally, let me come to you about 2021. What's your kind of take on Brexit? Do you think organisations are prepared? Do you think that it's going to be okay? I mean, I guess we'll see, won't we, in January? But what's your kind of take on that?
I may be smoking something here, but I think we may have got some confidence from survival through COVID.
Yep.
And Brexit is so unknown that we'll just figure it out.
We'll figure it out like we have the rest of 2020.
Yeah. Nobody knows exactly how this is all going to play out because it's so complex. And I think everyone's just tired of trying to prepare. and maybe we have got a higher level of baseline resilience, question mark on that. I think people are tired. But we're just like, you know, what else? What's the worst that can happen? We've had like a monumental shock. There's going to be another shock, I think, economic fallout, unless the government turns on the spending taps. We've already doing that through COVID. So I just think people, and maybe it's a British response, like we're just not seeing that level of preparedness around Brexit because we know it's going to happen and we don't know the minutiae and the details, and when that will come through we'll figure it out. Bigger things around rising, like the economic fallout of COVID, I think people need to start turning towards. I think even our politicians said Brexit was always going to be an adjustment, whatever that means. So it's just another bump that we'll ride through.
Kind of already in sort of survival mode and response mode. So this is just another thing that will add to the agenda on responding. I guess the point I wanted to make here is once we do know the detail, there is clearly some things that if the detail doesn't match up with what the perhaps expectation was, then there will be some work for technology strategists, business strategists to kind of pivot there.
The same old people make money from it. The consultants come in, the lawyers come in. Sorry, I'm a bit cynical, but do you see what I mean?
If you could sort of say, here is the economic impact of Brexit, here is the economic impact of COVID, right? And sort of do a bubble chart, like which one, and by the way, I think there's overlap. I think it's probably not that easy to sort of disentangle all those things, but like what is, or 50 years from now when they look back, what was the bigger economic hurdle? Because I would argue, certainly over here on this side of the Atlantic, we think we've dealt with the economic fallout of COVID, and we're just going to spend a whole metric shit ton of money to make it all go away. I think the fallout is really a lot deeper than that, and it's not as visible yet, right? The example, and I think, Oliver, I've used this with you before, maybe, is you think about on-premises work at a large office building, and you bring in, you've got your contractors and your consultants coming in week after week to do the work. And especially if they're not local contractors and they're more like strategic advisor type consultants, your McKinseys and all those guys flying in, right? You got a project, you got 20 of them come in, 20 people staying at the local hotel, right? Spending money in the bar, spending money on the Uber, spending money, at the local cafe, spending money probably at the bar, right? All that sort of stuff, all gone.
Yeah.
And it may never come back, or if it does, it's going to be, this much, not this much. What is the ripple effect of that, and how long will it take before we see it? Because I think it's gigantic, right?
No, I think you're right. In fact, that leads nicely onto the next kind of point I was going to make, which is, certain industries have been less impacted, some have been really heavily impacted, right? And you've touched on the hot one for me, which is the hospitality sector, which, I've almost started kind of bucketing things into three camps really, which is things that would otherwise, businesses that would otherwise be successful if it wasn't for COVID, right? Things like hospitality, perhaps some certain retail. Then I think there is another bucket, which is things that have shown that they can kind of operate wherever. So software companies like Tanium that I work for, we were already a very remote business. We've just doubled down on being a remote business, and we're doing the best we can to serve our customers remotely. And then for me, there's the third kind of bucket, which is the stuff that was perhaps on its way out or in decline, and this year has just accelerated. By that, I mean certain types of retail that have just largely gone online already, and the high street, the kind of physical stores have been on life support really. So Chris, you probably won't know this, but in the UK, we've had a whole slew of retail sort of established old retail stores kind of go into liquidation, administration, go out of business. And so for me, what's interesting to look at there is the ones that have invested in digital and online, like Next, but there are lots of many others, are doing okay. They're perhaps not doing amazingly well, but they're doing okay because they have another channel they can use. Other organizations, perhaps like your Debenhams and your Topshops and things that we've seen kind of closing or in administration now, perhaps one of the things that's been leveled at them is they just didn't respond to online and digital, and they've been left behind. And so what this has done for me is it's kind of, there are those three buckets for me. They're the organizations that are either doing okay or doing better because they're in demand. The ones that perhaps are the real unfortunate ones because there's nothing they can do about the situation. They're a bar, like you say, Chris, people just aren't, but they either can't go to bars or they're not going to bars because they're not going on the business trips. Or there's the third group, which is like really, the group that's kind of almost having the disruption come early.
It's curious, your three buckets. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, is there a really good example of something that was doing just fine in January and then COVID hit and now it's dead or on life support? And, hospitality, fine. Okay. But there's a counterfactual there, right?
Okay.
Marriott, right? Marriott global hotel chain, right? Biggest quarter ever profit-wise.
Interesting.
How? Why? Well, early on, they realized we're going to have a problem. Mm-hmm. And they, you might say gutted, you might say streamlined, you might say, operationalize some efficiencies, right? Around, how do we do what we do better? We got to dial back some things. So for example, if you're elite, whatever, they're platinum elite level, you have an ambassador, right? And that's the person that you interact with to book all your stuff, right? And they know your family and all this sort of stuff. So I've had the same one for like 15 years. All that went away, right? There's those sorts of strategies that I think help them. So
you're sort of basically saying it's forced sort of people to lean their organizations.
Maybe. But that's sort of the transformation I was talking about earlier, right? It's sort of forced those things that otherwise they wouldn't have done. And they've been successful. Others have not, right? So, it may be less the industry. I know you want to get on the retail thing, and I get it, right? But it may be less that and more the context in the industry. The Lego stores in the United States doing great. Across the mall, Victoria's Secret boarded up and empty.
Right.
Is it ladies aren't buying panties?
Susu made Sally laugh. Sally, what's
we're all in our pajamas? Like, I don't know what
well, yeah, there's women are caring less, I guess.
I don't know. So much to read into that. I'm not so sure.
I I was also hoping to have a slightly better gender balance on this panel. So apologies for picking on that.
Yeah, you might have to slap a content warning on this one.
No, so look, getting back to seriousness, Tom, what's your kind of take? I mean, clearly, the organization you work for has a kind of broad spectrum of different customer segments, right? What's your kind of take on organizations that have focused on digital transformation before this hit, being in a better place versus others that perhaps have just not spent the money and not invested?
Yeah, I mean, the retail space is an interesting one. I mean, obviously there's the online store versus bricks and mortar, right? It's not as simple as that. So one of the boom sectors was like DIY, building supplies, that kind of thing. And it was interesting to watch that because what you saw a lot of was really getting the online interaction that they already had working properly.
Right.
So that when you click and collect and you go to the shop, you actually get it. You get the item you've clicked on, rather than sorry, somebody's come along and asked for it and it's already gone, and we don't reconcile things to the end of the day, so we didn't realise. So I think that's the first wave. That look, you've actually got to do this stuff properly. But it strikes me that, and I don't know what this is, and this is me failing to make a prediction, but it strikes me that things are going to have to move on from that. There will be a case of a retail sector, with DIY being an example of being kind of out of town, kind of retail park, kind of drive up and fill your car up without interacting much. I think that will continue. Yeah. I think it's interesting you say about, you talk about places like department stores, for instance. I think there still is a case for that kind of model. I think it would be very different. Just to put it,
do you think it's going to be more experiential? So it's going to offer something different to just buying clothes. It's going to be something different in store. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I don't think that. I mean, I think there's still going to be a place for going into a shop and looking at clothes and seeing what other people are doing and this kind of thing.
Some of that will certainly come back, right? I mean, certain products people want to go and touch and feel and try on, and
exactly. But it's interesting to look at my local high street, kind of wandering around Oxford Street. It was interesting to notice which shops were failing and which shops are doing well. The shops that are doing well are the kind of narrowly focused specialist shops that have a particular look and feel, kind of, I don't know, demographic to them. Whereas the more broader department stores, which we've seen, have all struggled. And it seems to me that technology will have a place to play in improving that experience. I'll give you an example. Go to Uniqlo, you put your clothes in a basket, you put your basket in the till, it tells you, it instantly adds it all up and gives you a display of everything you've got, and away you walk. You don't have to talk to anybody or anything. Now, this is RFID, and back to Chris's point earlier, we've had this technology for decades now.
The next part of the kind of the conversation really for me is, and perhaps start with Chris, with the change in administration from Trump to Biden, going into next year, do you see that being, this Build Back Better thing being a theme, or do you think it's just folks just sort of trying to get back on their feet at all costs, regardless of things like sustainability?
The degree of movement in our politics on this side of the Atlantic is a lot narrower than I think a lot of people really think.
Okay.
Right? It's like, here you're a Democrat, here you're a Republican, right? It's like, it's not like you have, Hungarian nationalists and, Marxists, right? It's like we move sort of within this very narrow band, right? If you go back 15, 20, or actually you go back to 2008, when Biden was running against Obama, and they painted Biden as some sort of, ultra nationalist right wing, he supports gun use. Holy crap, we can't have this guy, right? Like those sorts of things. I mean, the reality is it's just such a narrow band because the vast middle of this country don't go for either end of the spectrum, really. So, will there be change? I'm sure there will be, but this gets to my point, right? Is, at least the way this system works is, things like the climate accord in Paris, right? It should have been a treaty that the United States Senate approved, because the fact that it wasn't, because they didn't think they could get it through and they didn't bother trying, right? The fact that it wasn't, he just signed it, an executive order that could just be unsigned and undone by the next guy. So some of those things, like you're saying, if we go back to 2008 and we look at some of the responses to the financial crisis, it was more like 2009 in the United States. It was like, one of the programs was we're going to go out and have the government buy up all the used cars in the market so that it'll force people to buy new cars and it'll keep the automotive supply network in shape, which touches like 20% of the US economy. The side effects, I mean, we're still dealing with a used secondary car market that is so imbalanced, right? That it makes people, I mean, driving cars for a lot longer that ordinarily they would have gotten rid of, right? We still have a very disrupted sort of secondary car market in this country a decade later. So there are all these unintended consequences. I think one of the ones that people would point to is like, oh, look, the green initiatives around electric cars, and now we have Tesla, right? And it's great and it's wonderful. Those two things are not connected, right? Like Tesla didn't rise as a result of government intervention, right? It rose in response to consumer demand in the market for different things, right? So I'm not sure I buy into the whole like government can force change kind of thing, the social engineering kind of concept. I do believe if you enable companies like a Tesla to exist, you will get Tesla, you'll get Rivian, you will get Amazon building 100,000 delivery trucks that are electric. You'll get that stuff if the field is open for that sort of thing to happen.
Yeah. I mean, Sally, your organization is already is all about the physical world, really, isn't it? So have you had kind of experiences of that? Would you echo what I said about people reconnecting with the natural world? Has Ordnance Survey seen an increase in demand for digital maps and things in this year and things like that?
Yeah, our consumer division is just been so successful. I think it has surprised the organisation, and actually it was a bit of an unloved child of the organisation, and it has really risen to a shining star. And now we're recruiting, getting investment into gaming and AR because of that. It almost surprised the inner sanctum in that we had a lot of this data already around green spaces, but like a sleepy government organisation, it wasn't hunting for those opportunities. I was actually really quite impressed with some of the stuff that we were able to respond to off our existing data in supporting NHS England as well. Actually see, less so from Chris' perspective, the blend of public and private, and genuinely I've never really thought that way, and it's opening up a whole realm of possibility, because the thing with you from the private, you get the ambition, the capability, the pace, the agility, but with public you get the scale, the depth, the breadth, the authority, the trust to do things that have impact. I would love to see that public and private be much more effective, so me as a taxpayer get a lot more bang for my buck. Change can happen in the right way, because I just think it feels like a bit of a Margaret Thatcher view of just let the capitalist system,
let the market make it work,
let the market win, because I think we've let the market exploit quite happily, and actually the unintended consequences are profound in our society, that I'm sure Margaret Thatcher never even considered, and we're basically all a product of that free, I forget the right term, the economic term, but that free transfer, free free
fair,
or barriers,
fair economics, right?
Yeah, I think there needs to be some protection to enable the right thing, because if you look at the electric vehicle market, car OEMs have responded, but infrastructure hasn't responded.
Right.
So, there needs to be a place where the consumer or the public feel as confident to find a charge as they do fuel.
Yeah.
And the people don't even know where the electric cables are to figure out where to put a charging point, let alone starting to respond to that. I just think some basic enabling stuff, national enabling stuff needs to happen to let the market win, because otherwise I think we're seeing this in fiber to the home rollout. sorry, this is very UK centric, but 3 different companies are digging out the same street to put in cable into the same hole.
Yeah, we touched on some of this with Leo de Souza actually when we talked about smart cities, and he talked about kind of they really try and stick other things in, or over capacity when they do have to dig up the street. What can we do at the same time? If we're putting one set of multimode fiber in, why don't we stick a whole stack in there? Future proofing it, but that obviously costs money. Before we hit the record button, we were talking also about kind of, I suppose, this being a chance for people to kind of hit the reset button a little bit on some of the things. It feels to me like, we also things like ethics. Clearly, conscious architecture choices was one of the previous panels we recorded for ISA, and there we were kind of talking about consumer sort of trends, but also business trends being kind of about reflecting and looking at kind of the ethics of the technology they're using, the mental health impact of technology, and the mental health impact. I know, Tom, you touched on earlier when we were just starting.
So that's an interesting one. I mean, I read a Gartner report that was talking about this thing called the Internet of Behaviors, which is pulling in a lot of the stuff. I think it's mostly been developed in China, and you can see where it's come from. It's like we want
surveillance sort of side of things.
Exactly.
Social
we want to encourage a certain
credit kind of thing, right?
Exactly right. We want to encourage certain behaviors. So if you walk across the road at the wrong time, we'll dock your social credit. Probably in 10 years' time, it will be very much like we accept the invasion of privacy that we currently undergo. And I like being able to, I don't know, go to my GP, so I'll accept the fact that they know all about my dietary preferences. I don't know. I think Gartner said, well, we're just going to have to get used to it, because we've proven with the privacy aspect that people will quite happily sell everything about themselves for a bit of convenience.
I disagree. People didn't know what the trade was, and there needs to be a transparency. If people really understand that it's not free, they're selling themselves, then they're like, oh, hang on a minute, then they can make an informed choice. If they're okay to share all that, then great, they get it at that price. But this is why I was questioning, is VPN dead? Maybe there's other technologies for personal privacy. I think that there's an awakening of the consumer.
It's a good point. I mean, you raised the point of people didn't know. That's interesting, because I kind of did, and I still find myself, you go to a website, again, a bit kind of Eurocentric, but you go to a website and it says, oh, do you want to accept cookies? And it's like, look, literally, I just want that one line of code. Oh, for God's sake. And I do it. Every now and again, I do it.
I just want to read the article. Let me in. Let me read it.
Exactly. It's just like, oh, just take all of my information. Just give me the bloody line of code. Back to the whole kind of regulation and government impact point of view, a lot of it depends on how well that regulation is done. It's done well. And I think I gave the example of energy efficiency of a fridge.
Yep.
If it's done well, it's simple to easy understand, and you have a choice.
Right.
And that's the key point. You have to have a choice. If you have a choice, then that regulation can have an impact. But when I go to that website, how much choice do I have? Well, I've probably only found it that one place. Yeah, this whole...
It's a really good point, isn't it? Because if we were to kind of take the analogy of fridges and apply it to kind of social media, I can't go to one social media option, which is privacy rating C, and one social media option, which perhaps I pay money for, and it's rating A, because the world is kind of, this kind of network effect leads to monopolies, right?
Exactly.
So it's a really interesting point. I'd like to kind of close with perhaps what are your kind of hopes and predictions for next year? Look, and I'm personally suggesting we only go for like the first few months, because I think it's just too uncertain. But you can be bold if you want to be. So Chris, what are your kind of hopes and predictions perhaps for early part of 2021?
Yeah, so I touched on some of the predictions, I think, a little bit, right, in terms of usability of some of this tech that we're dealing with. I think that's going to improve. I think that's going to get better. I think, certainly on this side of the Atlantic, we encourage and love sort of the creative destruction, right? So I think there's going to be new things like, 5 years ago, if you had said Zoom would be what it is, people would be like, what the hell are you talking about, right? So I think we're going to find new Zooms, right? It used to be the Uber of something, right? You would describe it like it's the Uber of flower delivery. It's the Uber, right? I think we'll be talking about things like, it's the Zoom of,
retail.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? So I think there's going to be some of that user experience stuff, right? Yeah. Here's my hope. This is probably too much, right? Is turn off the damn Facebook and just close your Twitter account. I mean, honest to God, I'm so tired of the rage machine on Twitter. I don't even log in anymore. Like I cannot start my day that way. It's terrible, right? And it doesn't matter what side of the politics you land on any given topic. It's just an awful experience. It's antisocial.
Ironic, isn't it, given it's called social media?
Right. I think Facebook, my father used to say when I was a lot younger that he believed that personal debt and credit was going to destroy Western civilization. No, Facebook destroyed Western civilization, almost, nearly, right? Turn the damn thing off or break it up or do something, because it's just reinforcing tribal attitudes, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. I don't know that we thought it was going to be that way, you know, when Zuckerberg was just ranking women by their features in his Harvard dorm room, you know, that it was going to like lead to the downfall of Western civilization. Turn it off. Turn it off.
It'd be interesting to see how many people choose to, how many people do kind of just get sick of it and turn it off, right? No, that's an interesting kind of cue. So, Sally, do you want to go next on hopes and predictions for 2021?
Hopes, I think maybe my idealistic self of, I think, linked to Chris's point, just a kinder, more empathetic society. I think in the work sense, I actually think there's going to be hopefully new ways of working that aren't transactional. At the minute, collaboration is like, I do something on a doc, someone else does something on a doc, and it's like just input basis. I want to see the creative bits which the machines won't get. This is the human power. How can that be done? Whether that's AR, VR, well, I don't know, insert new technology, but bringing the best of the human spirit into the workplace, and maybe that will come from gaming.
Tom, what's your kind of take on 2021?
A couple of things. It's been interesting. Smart cities. Just wanted to pick up on that. My prediction for 2021 is adoption is going to, the whole smart cities kind of rollout is going to slow down significantly, and I think that's going to, one of the big drivers of that is, first of all, money is going to be spent elsewhere. And secondly, a lot of smart cities initiative are either directly or indirectly driven by transport problems or congestion problems in the transport network. And given the slowdown in economic activity and everything else that's going on, that's much less of a driver. So I think they're going to be kind of shunted off to the side a little bit. Is this going to be the year where the citizen developer starts to become king?
Okay.
I think that's an interesting one to think about. And in terms of hope, picking up the whole social media thing, I'm hoping that in just about every sphere, we start to see a bit more nuance in our discussions. And this covers everything from politics, even to architecture, because I've noticed in the last year or two that architectural discussions have become much more dogmatic, much less about convincing people and reasoning a solution for a given space. It's become much more dogmatic. We've got people doing this and that. We talked about this with a different community about architectural cargo cults. I have the right solution to every problem, and I'm going to apply it regardless of the circumstances around it. And I think it comes from that whole idea of, to be an architect, you have to be opinionated, and everything you say is right, which to me is the opposite of what a good architect is.
Interesting. I think it's the danger of kind of looking at the hammer looking for nails, right?
Yeah.
Oliver, I've one thing to say. You can cut and chop this in however you want. This idea of where government can help the private sector, right? Help build us back and all these things, or deal with problems like Brexit, or deal with problems like COVID. I've done a lot of work for pharmaceutical companies in the US, and especially in the clinical trial space. A clinical trial can take 10 years. Right. It can take 3 years just to find the people for the trial, right? And then you got to run the trial and the approvals and everything. Pfizer spent, I don't know how many billions and billions of dollars on Viagra, right? Now, they managed to probably get most of that money back and then some. But the point is that it takes a really long time. And yet, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer there are three vaccines that 6 months ago did not exist. That's unheard of, right? Yeah. The United States has 3 vaccines for this thing that, we just discovered, within the year. I think that's a great model, because would they have done it on their own out of commercial interests? Probably, maybe, but probably at a different pace. Would the government have been efficient in just sort of mandating and dictating and, bureaucratizing, everything? Probably not, right? But this was a good partnership. They said, look, we're going to cut a bunch of tape. We're going to free up all of this, highway for you guys to go. and we have now 3 companies with a vaccine. I think that's amazing. And that's a great model.
Chris, maybe just on that, how do we get that type of response to the, the collapse of biodiversity, the climate change, and ecological crisis?
I think
it's that war effort, isn't it? Like things can really change once you get everyone playing the same way.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a topic for a future architect.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing. My hope is that we as much as we find solutions for the current challenges like CV19, but we almost to a degree don't lose the kind of war mentality or crisis sort of mode that Sally was talking about, to kind of make people wake up and realize once this is over, we do need to kind of continue to find solutions for our big sort of challenging, chunky global problems, and that maybe perhaps hopefully that problem solver mode that we've perhaps got ourselves into, we can kind of help architect a better balance with our natural ecosystem, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. And that's not to say that economic activity, shouldn't be a focus as well. Of course, of course that is. But it's this triple bottom line piece that we've touched on before. The kind of profit, people, and purpose, or society. Whatever other things you want to kind of insert in there. I'm hopeful that this kind of makes people realize there are better ways of doing things. There are different ways of doing things. But we sort of stay in a semi-crisis sort of mode to say, right, we now need to sort of sort this out because there are other things that will impact us even worse potentially than COVID. The sea level rise and some of the things around, the kind of icebergs and stuff that they're now reporting are kind of disconnecting from various ice shelves. It's quite disturbing, and they don't really make headlines at the moment because there's other stuff making the headlines. But yeah, so that's kind of my hope. Look. Once again, a fantastic conversation. Thank you, all of you, for your time. It's been brilliant to kind of chat and hear different perspectives. That's exactly what these things are all about. It's been good to have some debate and some different views on where the future may lead. And with that, yeah, thanks everyone. It's been great.